The first drop of human blood shed by another human fell upon a land that still remembered Eden. There was no court, there was no police. There was not even a word for what Cain was about to do, because it had never happened before. Abel's body fell in silence, but the sound of that act would echo throughout all of human history, and it all began with an offering that God refused. Before we begin, write in the comments where you are watching from. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell. We continue. To understand what happened in that field, it is necessary to go back a few years. Adam and Eve had been expelled from the Garden of Eden. The text of Genesis 3 describes the scene with details that often go unnoticed. God clothed them with tunics of skin before sending them away. This means that an animal died. For the first time in history, blood was shed, not by human violence, but by divine provision. It was a sign, a shadow of what was to come. But Adam and Eve probably did not understand the depth of that gesture at that moment. They were too busy processing the loss. The perfect garden was left behind. Access to the tree of life was blocked by cherubim with flaming swords. One era had ended. Another, much more difficult one, was beginning. Life outside of Eden was radically different. The soil that once produced in abundance now demanded sweat. The earth that once cooperated now resisted. Thorns and thistles sprouted where there was once plenty. Eve would give birth in pain. Adam would work until the end of his days to scratch a living from a ground cursed because of his choice. This was the new world, a world where death now existed as an inevitable reality. A world where the relationship with God, once direct and intimate, carried the weight of the separation caused by sin. And it was in this setting of loss and new beginnings that the first two sons of human history were born. The first was named Cain. The name in Hebrew sounds like the word acquire or obtain. Eve said upon giving birth, "I have acquired a man with the help of the Lord." There is something hopeful in this declaration. Some scholars believe that Eve may have thought Cain would be the fulfillment of the promise made by God in the garden, the one who would crush the serpent's head. After all, God had promised that the woman's offspring would strike the enemy. Perhaps Eve looked at that first baby and imagined she was holding the Redeemer. If that is what she thought, she was mistaken. Deeply mistaken. The Redeemer would come, but it would not be Cain, and millennia would pass before the promise was fulfilled. The second son came later, Abel. His name in Hebrew is Hevel, which means breath, vapor, something fleeting and ephemeral. It is the same word that the book of Ecclesiastes uses repeatedly when it says that all is vanity, all is vapor, all is fleeting. The choice of the name itself carries an almost prophetic weight. Abel would be brief. His life would last less than anyone could imagine. The boy whose name meant breath would have his existence cut short like a breath, quickly, suddenly, before he could leave descendants or build any visible legacy. The two grew up side by side. The biblical text offers no details about their childhood, about games between brothers, about conversations around the fire while Adam told stories of the lost garden. But what we do know is significant. Cain became a tiller of the ground. Abel became a shepherd of sheep. Two trades, two ways of surviving in the post-Eden world, two different paths to sustain life on a land that now required constant effort. Neither occupation was superior to the other in itself. Cultivating the soil was honest and necessary work. Tending flocks was as well. The land needed to be tilled to produce grains, vegetables, and fruits. Animals needed shepherds to lead them, protect them, and care for them. Both brothers contributed to the family's survival. The difference between the two was not in what they did, but in something much deeper, something invisible to human eyes, but perfectly visible to the eyes of God. Genesis 4 verses 3 to 5 records the moment that would change everything. And in the course of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. Two offerings before the same God, two completely distinct attitudes, and a result that would forever divide the history of those two brothers. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but he did not look with favor on Cain and his offering. The text does not explain exactly how this approval and rejection were communicated. Some suggest that fire descended from heaven to consume Abel's offering, as would later happen with Elijah on Mount Carmel. Others imagine a visible manifestation of the divine presence. What is clear is that both brothers knew, without a shadow of a doubt, which offering was accepted and which was rejected. There was no ambiguity. The divine verdict was evident. Here is the secret that few understand. The difference was not in the type of offering, whether it was vegetable or animal. The difference was in the heart behind it. The biblical text makes a point of specifying that Abel brought of the firstborn and of their fat. Firstborn, or first fruits, means the first, the best, that which you set aside before anything else. It is not what is left over after you have met your own needs. It is what you give to God before everything, recognizing that He deserves priority. Fat, in the sacrificial context that would permeate the entire Old Testament, represented the most valuable portion, the richest part, that reserved exclusively for God. Abel gave his best. He gave first. He gave with clear intention and a devoted heart. Cain brought of the fruit of the ground. The text does not say they were first fruits. It does not say it was the best of the harvest. It does not say it was the most choice portion, just fruits. Perhaps what was left over after he had already kept for himself. Perhaps what was convenient to bring. Perhaps the minimum gesture necessary to fulfill a religious obligation. Cain's offering had the appearance of devotion, but it lacked substance. It was a religious gesture without true surrender. It was form without heart. And God, who sees beyond the surface, who penetrates the deepest intentions, did not accept it. Hebrews 11 verse 4 confirms this reading centuries later. By faith, Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts. The difference was faith. Abel believed. Abel trusted. Abel offered with genuine reverence. Cain merely performed an empty ritual. There is a principle here that runs through the entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. God is not impressed by the outward form of worship. He looks at the heart. The prophet Samuel would learn this centuries later when anointing David. The Lord does not see as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Jesus himself would teach this to the Pharisees who concerned themselves with external rituals while their hearts remained distant. And it was already evident here in the first act of worship recorded in the Scriptures. Cain became angry, deeply angry. His countenance fell. The original Hebrew suggests an anger that manifested physically, a fallen, closed, heavy, somber face. It was the kind of fury that consumes from within before exploding outward. Envy had found fertile ground in Cain's heart and was growing rapidly, like a weed choking a plantation. Every time he looked at Abel, he felt the rejection burn stronger. Every time he remembered his brother's accepted offering, his resentment increased. And God, in his infinite mercy, intervened before it was too late. Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. This is one of the densest and most revealing passages in the entire book of Genesis. God did not reject Cain forever. He did not close the doors permanently. He explained the way back with absolute clarity. Do well, and you will be accepted. The door was still open. The chance still existed. The same God who rejected the offering was offering guidance so that the next one would be accepted. It was grace in the midst of correction. But there was an urgent, almost desperate warning. Sin was at the door. The imagery is visceral, almost physical, like a predator crouching, waiting for the right moment to strike, like a hungry lion lying in wait for its prey. Sin's desire was to dominate Cain, to conquer him, to devour him completely. But Cain had a choice. He had to dominate sin first. It was a battle that could be won. It was a temptation that could be resisted. God would not have given the warning if victory were impossible. It was an internal battle, a decision of the will, a defining moment, and Cain lost. Verse 8 says, Cain told Abel his brother, "Let us go out to the field." And it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. The brevity of the text is shocking. There are no details about the method used. There is no description of a struggle or resistance. There are no final words from Abel, no pleas for mercy. There is no description of Cain's face during the act, nor of the terror in Abel's eyes as he realized what was happening. Only the raw and terrible action, recorded with a brutal economy of words. Cain rose up against his brother, and he killed him. It was the first homicide in human history, the first murder, the first human blood intentionally shed by human hands, and it happened between brothers, within the first family. Violence did not wait generations to emerge. It did not take centuries to manifest. It appeared right in the second generation of humanity, like a plague that was always latent, waiting for the opportunity to reveal itself. Imagine the scene for a moment. Two men in an open field, the vast sky above them, the silent earth beneath their feet. No human witness nearby. No written law that defined that as a crime. No justice system to punish the guilty. Cain probably looked around and saw only solitude. He probably believed he was completely alone, that no one would see, that no one would know, that he could simply bury the body, return home, and go on with his life as if nothing had happened. Then came the voice. "Where is Abel, your brother?" God knew exactly where Abel was. He knew what had happened. He knew every detail, every movement, every thought that passed through Cain's mind before, during, and after the act. The question was not due to a lack of information. The same dynamic from Eden was repeating itself with disturbing precision. When Adam sinned in the garden, God asked, "Where are you?" Not because he did not know Adam's location, but as an invitation to repentance. It was an open door for confession, an opportunity for the truth, a chance for genuine brokenness. Cain chose the lie. "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The answer is doubly terrible. First, a direct and blatant lie. He knew exactly where Abel was. The body probably still lay in the field, perhaps only a few meters away. The blood was still fresh on Cain's hands, and he looked at God and said, "I do not know." Second, an evasion of responsibility disguised as a rhetorical question. Am I my brother's keeper? In Hebrew, the word for keeper is shomer, a guardian, a protector, one who watches and cares. It was a cynical question, cruel, mocking, as if his brother's life had no relation to him, as if Abel were a stranger for whom Cain had no obligation. God responded with a devastating revelation. "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Abel's blood had a voice. It cried out. It screamed. The earth that absorbed that innocent blood became an involuntary witness to the crime. Nothing escapes the eyes of God. No crime is perfect before the one who sees all, knows all, and hears even the silent cry of blood shed unjustly. Cain thought the empty field meant an absence of witnesses, but the earth itself bore witness, the blood itself accused. And then came the sentence. "So now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth." The punishment was surgically precise. Cain was a tiller of the ground. His identity was linked to the soil. His trade depended on the earth producing. Now the earth itself would turn against him. The soil he had worked his whole life would no longer produce fruit in his hands. The vocation that defined who he was would become a source of constant frustration, a perpetual reminder of his sin. Furthermore, he would be a fugitive and a wanderer, without a fixed place, without a stable community, without belonging, wandering the earth for the rest of his days. Cain responded with a phrase that reveals much about the condition of his heart. "My punishment is greater than I can bear." Some translate this verse as, "My iniquity is too great to be forgiven." The ambiguity exists in the original Hebrew text. But in both readings, Cain's focus remains on himself. There is no repentance for the act committed. There is no lament for the death of his brother. There is no genuine acknowledgement of the evil practiced. There are no tears for Abel, only concern for personal consequences, only fear of what would happen to him from that moment on. He continues his complaint. "Surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground. I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, and it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me." Cain was afraid of being killed. The same violence he practiced against his brother now haunted him as a constant possibility. It is the nature of sin. It sows fear in the one who commits it. Cain introduced violent death into the relationship between human beings and immediately began to fear that others would do to him what he did to Abel. The murderer became a hostage to the fear of being murdered. God's response at this moment is genuinely surprising. "Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone finding him should kill him." The mark of Cain. Over the centuries, many have speculated about what this mysterious mark might be. Some suggested something visible on the skin, perhaps a scar or a spot. Others imagined a change in physical appearance, something that would immediately distinguish Cain from anyone else. Still others proposed a supernatural sign, a kind of invisible but effective protection. The biblical text simply does not specify the exact nature of the mark. What is absolutely clear is its purpose: protection. God did not destroy Cain. He did not allow others to destroy him. In the midst of the severest judgment, there was incomprehensible mercy, a mercy that surpasses human understanding. Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. Nod means wandering or vagabondage in Hebrew. Even the name of the place perfectly reflected Cain's condition. He was condemned to wander, and it was exactly to a land of wanderers that he headed. Far from God, far from family, far from everything he knew, carrying forever the weight of what he had done. But something curious happened next, something that seems to contradict the divine sentence. Cain did not live as a solitary nomad forever. He knew a woman, he had children, and he built a city, the first city mentioned in the entire Bible, and he named it after his firstborn son, Enoch. Think of the profound irony of this situation. God said Cain would be a fugitive and a wanderer. Cain's response was to build walls, to establish a fixed place, to create artificial roots, to found a civilization. It was as if he were trying to bypass the curse through pure human effort. If God said he would have no roots, he would create his own roots. If God said he would wander without a destination, he would build a destination for himself. It was rebellion disguised as entrepreneurship. It was disobedience dressed as progress. Cain's descendants are listed in the following verses of Genesis 4, and they reveal a fascinating pattern. Lamech, Cain's great-great-great-grandson in the 5th generation, had 2 wives, Adah and Zillah. The first mention of polygamy in the Bible appears in the lineage of the first murderer. Lamech's sons were notable in terms of cultural and technological contribution. Jabal was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock, the founder of organized pastoral life. Jubal was the father of all those who play the harp and flute, the first musician, the creator of the sound arts. Tubal-Cain was an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron, the first metallurgist, the father of tool and weapon technology, music, metallurgy, organized livestock, instruments of labor, possibly instruments of war. Human civilization advanced through the lineage of a fugitive murderer. There is something deeply disturbing in this, and something painfully true about human nature. Our greatest technological achievements do not absolve us of our worst moral failures. Material progress does not equate to spiritual progress. A society can build magnificent cities and still be morally corrupt at its core. Lamech, in fact, composed a song that reveals the accelerated spiritual deterioration of that lineage. He said to his wives, "Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. Observe the terrible progression. Cain killed out of envy and spiritual jealousy. Lamech boasted of killing for minor physical offenses, a wound, a hurt, and he still invoked a protection greater than the one God gave to Cain. If Cain would be avenged 7 times, Lamech demanded 77 times. Violence had become completely normalized. What began as an isolated crime, committed in secret in an empty field, transformed into a proud culture, into an accepted pattern, into a reason for poetic boasting. The sin that Cain did not dominate now dominated all his descendants. Meanwhile, something radically different was happening in another lineage. Eve gave birth to another son after the death of Abel. His name was Seth. The word means granted, or appointed, or put in place of. Eve declared upon giving birth, God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed. Seth represented a divine new beginning, a new chance given by God, a continuity of the promise that seemed permanently interrupted by Abel's death. The righteous man had died without leaving children, without leaving heirs, without leaving a visible continuation. But God raised another in his place, and it was through Seth, not Cain, that the messianic lineage would proceed through the centuries. Abraham descends from Seth, David descends from Seth, and eventually Jesus Christ, the promised Messiah, would come from this same line. Abel's seed was cut off, but God planted another in its place. The 4th chapter of Genesis ends with a tremendously significant note. And as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. Calling on the name of the Lord. Intentional worship, a collective and organized search for God. While Cain's lineage built impressive cities, forged useful metals, composed elaborate music, and accumulated material achievements, Seth's lineage began to seek the Creator deliberately. 2 parallel civilizations growing side by side, 2 divergent paths, 2 radically opposite directions, one turned toward human achievements, the other turned toward the face of God. The story of Cain and Abel reappears several times in the New Testament, always in revealing and instructive contexts. Jesus mentioned Abel as the first martyred prophet in Matthew 23, verse 35. Abel's blood represents the beginning of a long and painful line of righteous people persecuted and killed for proclaiming inconvenient truth. From Abel to Zechariah, passing through all the prophets stoned, ignored, and murdered. History repeats itself because the human heart remains the same. The Apostle John, in his first letter, chapter 3, verse 12, used Cain as the definitive negative example. We should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. John identified the deepest root of the problem. Cain's deeds were evil, not just the murder itself, but something prior, something that existed before the crime was committed. A corrupt disposition of heart, a fundamental orientation of life. Cain belonged to the evil one even before he raised his hand against Abel. He was aligned with the enemy before the blood was shed. The homicide was a consequence, not a cause, of his deteriorated spiritual condition. Hebrews 12, verse 24, makes an extraordinary comparison that illuminates the entire theological meaning of this story. The text says that Christians have come to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. Abel's blood cried out for justice. It screamed for vengeance. It demanded condemnation for the guilty. It was the blood of a victim asking for retribution. But the blood of Jesus speaks of something completely different. It speaks of forgiveness for the guilty. It speaks of reconciliation for enemies. It speaks of grace for the unworthy. 2 sacrifices separated by millennia. 2 absolutely distinct cries. One asking for what was deserved, the other offering what could never be earned. This is the great reversal operated by the gospel. What Cain introduced into the human experience, violent death, separation between brothers, rupture of community, flight from the presence of God, Jesus came to undo. The first murder happened between two brothers because one could not bear to see God looking with favor upon the other. Jesus died so that we could all be looked upon with favor, regardless of our past, our imperfect offerings, or our divided hearts. But there is still a deeper layer hidden in this ancient narrative. Abel was killed in the field, far from human witnesses. He was a shepherd of sheep by vocation. He brought a lamb as an acceptable sacrifice. Millennia later, another lamb would be led to the sacrifice, not by the hands of a single envious brother, but by the whole of humanity conspiring against him. "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world," declared John the Baptist upon seeing Jesus approaching. The image of the lamb that Abel offered pointed prophetically to Christ. The blood shed on that primitive altar prefigured the blood that would be shed on a Roman cross. And Cain's attitude also echoes through the centuries to this day. How many offer to God only what is convenient, the residual, what is left over after all other priorities are met? How many fulfill external religious rituals while their hearts remain closed and distant? How many make visible gestures of worship while cultivating invisible envy within? Cain's rejected offering was not an isolated event lost in antiquity. It was the first documented example of a pattern that would repeat infinitely through human history. The prophet Malachi, in the final chapters of the Old Testament, confronted the people of Israel for bringing blind, lame, and sick animals as a sacrifice to the Lord. It was exactly the attitude of Cain reincarnated in a new generation. Giving to God the minimum technically acceptable instead of the best genuinely available. And God, through the prophet, reacted in the same way he reacted in the field with Cain. He rejected it. Samuel said to Saul, after the king disobeyed explicit divine orders and tried to compensate with impressive sacrifices, "To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams." Cain brought sacrifice, but he did not bring genuine obedience. He had the correct form, but he lacked the internal substance. And that was never, is not, and will never be sufficient before the God who examines hearts. Consider also the magnitude of what Cain lost on that fateful day. He did not just lose direct communion with God. He did not just lose the fertility of the land he worked. He did not just lose his place in the family community. He lost his brother, the only other person of his generation in the entire world, the only human being who completely shared his history, his origin, his childhood memories, his experiences of growing up as a son of Adam and Eve. Cain eliminated forever any possibility of future reconciliation. He permanently closed a door that could never be reopened. The brother he killed out of blind envy was the same brother who could have been his greatest ally in the difficult journey of life outside of Eden. Envy works exactly like that. It does not calculate real costs. It does not consider long-term consequences. It sees only the imagined threat in the present moment. Cain looked at the divine approval of Abel and interpreted it as personal diminishment. But nothing in Abel's acceptance prevented Cain from also being accepted. God made that absolutely clear in his intervention. If you do well, will you not be accepted? There was room for both. There was approval available for the two of them. The problem was never Abel and his excellent offering. The problem was always Cain's heart and his negligent offering. And by eliminating Abel, Cain solved absolutely nothing. The internal wound remained open. The divine rejection remained in force. Only now there was innocent blood on his hands, inescapable guilt on his conscience, and perpetual solitude on the horizon. The dynamic between these two brothers also anticipates countless future conflicts recorded in the biblical narrative. Ishmael and Isaac would dispute the inheritance of Abraham. Esau and Jacob would struggle from the womb. Joseph would be sold as a slave by brothers, consumed with jealousy. Repeatedly through the scriptures, brothers enter into violent conflict because of perceived divine choice, apparent favoritism, or growing envy. The pattern established by Cain reproduces generation after generation. But not all conflicts end in irreversible death. Some find unlikely reconciliation. Jacob and Esau met again in peace decades after the original betrayal. Joseph generously forgave the brothers who sold him and planned his death. History does not always have to end like Cain's. There is another possible path. The mark that God placed on Cain also deserves careful reflection. It was protection, not approval of the crime. It was mercy, not absolution of guilt. Cain would live out his days, but he would live permanently marked. Every person who met him would recognize the sign. He would carry the visible weight of his act in constant publicity. It was at once surprising grace and inescapable consequence intertwined. God spared the life of the murderer, but he did not erase the history of the murder. The mark protected, and at the same time reminded. Many flee from the presence of God hoping to find freedom and relief, just as Cain fled to the land of Nod. But what they generally find is the same internal wandering that Cain experienced. Persistent restlessness. An existential void that cities cannot fill, that professional achievements do not satisfy, that human relationships do not resolve, and that numerous descendants do not heal. The impressive civilization that Cain and his descendants built was genuinely remarkable in material terms, but it was born of flight, not reconciliation. It was external compensation for an internal wound. It was an attempt to fill with horizontal achievements a void that could only be filled vertically. Cain built the first city. His descendants invented sophisticated musical instruments, tools of bronze and iron, and developed advanced livestock techniques. Human civilization was born and flourished from the hands of a fugitive murderer and his offspring. There is something genuinely disturbing in this reality, and something deeply true about the human condition. Our greatest collective achievements forever carry the shadow of our worst individual choices. God did not destroy Cain when he had every justification to do so. He marked him, protected him, and allowed him to live a long and apparently prosperous life. Perhaps because divine mercy is infinitely more scandalous than the human mind can process. Perhaps because even the first murderer in history still carried, however disfigured, the image of the Creator imprinted on his humanity. Perhaps because God already knew, from before the foundation of the world, that true justice would come in another way entirely, in another distant time, through another sacrifice, not of a lamb on an altar, but of a lamb on a cross. The question God asked Cain in that blood-stained field crosses the millennia and still resonates with full force today. Where is your brother? It was not a question about geographical location. It was a question about moral responsibility, about human connection, about what we do to one another and what we fail to do. And every generation, every family, every individual needs to answer that question again. Where is your brother? What have you done with him? What have you failed to do for him?